The courtroom was dead silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. I watched my whole world crumble as Linda Williams, my ex-husband's mother, sat in that witness chair with her perfectly pressed suit and her condescending smile, telling the judge exactly why I didn't deserve to raise my own son. Your Honor, Maya Chen works all night with strangers and then brings different men around that poor child. What kind of stability is that for an 8-year-old? The boy needs structure, needs a proper family with consistent schedules and moral values. Marcus's lawyer nodded approvingly, adding fuel to the fire. No stability, no morals, Your Honor. This woman prioritizes her social life over her child's well-being. I felt my face burn with humiliation. Here I was, a 29-year-old single mother who'd been working night shifts as an ER nurse just to pay the bills and give my son the best life I could manage. And they were making me sound like some kind of negligent party girl. The judge was taking notes, his expression growing more concerned with every word they spoke. That's when something incredible happened. My 8-year-old son, Ethan, who'd been sitting quietly in the front row clutching his tablet, suddenly stood up. His small voice cut through the tension like a knife. Excuse me, Judge, but they're not telling the truth about my mom. The entire courtroom turned to stare at this little boy who'd just interrupted formal legal proceedings. Even the bailiff's eyes widened in surprise. But Ethan wasn't done. He held up his tablet with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Judge, I have something important to show you. I think you need to hear what they really said about me and my mom when they thought nobody was listening. I'm Maya Chen. I thought I had everything figured out. I'd been raising my son Ethan alone since his father, Marcus Williams, walked out on us when Ethan was just 3. I worked nights at the hospital because the pay was better, and every extra dollar meant I could afford Ethan's soccer cleats, his school supplies, maybe even a family vacation someday. Ethan was my whole world. At 8 years old, he was this curious, tech-savvy little boy who loved building things with Legos and asking a million questions about everything. He was the kind of kid who'd spend hours on his tablet playing educational games or video calling me during my work breaks just to say goodnight. Marcus had been out of our lives for years until he suddenly returned with his new fiancée Jessica and his domineering mother, Linda Williams. Linda was one of those women who believed there was only one right way to raise children. And apparently, working nights to save lives wasn't it. She'd made her disapproval of me crystal clear from the moment Marcus decided he wanted custody. And Marcus's lawyer, David Rodriguez, was the kind of aggressive attorney who'd twist anything to win a case. He'd taken my dedication to my career and my 6-month relationship with Jake, a wonderful pediatric physical therapist I'd met at Ethan's soccer practice, and turned them into weapons against me. But sitting in that courtroom, watching my 8-year-old son stand up to defend me with nothing but his tablet and his unwavering belief in the truth, I realized that sometimes the smallest people in our lives can be the biggest heroes. Let me tell you how this nightmare all started. 5 years ago, when Ethan was just 3 years old, Marcus walked into our kitchen on a Tuesday morning and announced he was leaving. Not because of another woman, not because of money problems, but because he wasn't ready for the responsibility of being a real father. Those were his exact words. He packed his bags, kissed Ethan on the forehead like he was going on a business trip, and disappeared from our lives. I remember standing there in my nursing scrubs, getting ready for my shift, watching my toddler ask, "Where's Daddy going?" and having absolutely no idea how to answer. Marcus left me with a mortgage, daycare bills, and a little boy who kept asking when Daddy was coming home for dinner. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I switched from day shifts to nights at the hospital. The night differential meant an extra 20% in my paycheck, and as a single mom, that extra money was the difference between keeping our house and moving into my parents' basement. It wasn't easy, but I created a system that worked for us. My days became perfectly choreographed around Ethan's needs. I'd sleep from 8 a.m. until 2:30 p.m. while he was at school, then pick him up and dedicate every afternoon to being his mom. We'd go to the park, work on homework at the kitchen table, and I'd cook dinner while he told me about his day. At 6:30 p.m., I'd drop him off at Mrs. Peterson's house next door. She was a retired teacher who adored Ethan and charged me half what other babysitters wanted because she said it kept her young. During my 12-hour shifts at the hospital, I'd call Ethan every night during my breaks. Even at 3 years old, then 4, then 5, he'd tell me about his dreams or ask me to sing him a lullaby over the phone. Mrs. Peterson would hold the phone up to his ear while he fell asleep, and I'd whisper goodnight stories between checking on patients in the emergency room. Saturdays were our special days. I'd make Mickey Mouse pancakes, and we'd spend the entire day together doing whatever Ethan wanted. Sometimes we'd go to the zoo, sometimes we'd build elaborate Lego cities on the living room floor. Those Saturday mornings were sacred to us. For 4 years, this routine worked perfectly. Ethan thrived in school, made friends easily, and never once complained about my schedule. He understood that Mommy helped sick people get better at night, and he was proud of what I did. He'd tell his teachers and classmates that his mom was a superhero who saved lives. Then 6 months ago, I met Jake at one of Ethan's soccer games. Jake was a pediatric physical therapist who worked with special needs kids, and he was volunteering as an assistant coach. He was patient, kind, and amazing with children. When Ethan twisted his ankle during practice, Jake spent 20 minutes making sure he was okay and teaching him proper stretching techniques. Jake and I started talking, then dating. He'd come over for dinner on my nights off, help Ethan with homework, and play video games with him. For the first time since Marcus left, I felt like we might actually become a real family again. Ethan adored Jake, and Jake treated my son like he was his own. Everything was perfect until Marcus suddenly reappeared 3 months ago with his new fiancée Jessica and a lawyer demanding custody. Jessica was 26, worked in marketing, and had very specific ideas about how families should look. She wanted the white picket fence dream, complete with a ready-made child to prove she was maternal. The first thing Marcus said when he showed up at our door wasn't, "How's Ethan?" or "I've missed you both." It was, "This living situation isn't appropriate for my son. You're working nights, dating random men, and confusing him about family structure." I couldn't believe it. This man who'd abandoned us without a second thought was suddenly concerned about family structure. But Marcus had always been good at rewriting history to make himself look better. In his version of events, he'd left because I was too focused on my career, and now he was back to rescue Ethan from my unstable lifestyle. Linda Williams, his mother, made her opinions clear from their first visit. She looked around our cozy house, noticed Jake's jacket hanging by the door, and pursed her lips in disapproval. "That poor child needs consistency," she declared, "not a mother who works all night and parades men through his life." I tried explaining that Jake wasn't just some random man, that we'd been together for months and that Ethan loved him, but Linda had already made up her mind. In her world, there was only one acceptable way to raise a child, and apparently everything I'd been doing was wrong. That's how I found myself sitting in a courtroom, fighting for the right to keep raising the son I'd never stopped loving, protecting, and providing for. The custody hearing started at 9 a.m. on a gray Thursday morning that felt like the end of the world. I'd barely slept the night before, running through every possible scenario in my head, trying to prepare for what Marcus and his lawyer might say. But nothing could have prepared me for the systematic destruction of my character that was about to unfold. Linda Williams was their first witness, and she took the stand like she was delivering a sermon. Dressed in her navy blue suit with her silver hair perfectly styled, she looked every inch the respectable grandmother. The judge listened intently as she painted a picture of me that was so distorted I barely recognized myself. "Your Honor, Maya Chen has created an environment of chaos and instability for that precious child," Linda began, her voice dripping with fake concern. "She works all night at the hospital, exposing herself to dangerous situations and questionable people. Then she comes home exhausted and dumps Ethan with babysitters so she can sleep all day." I watched the judge scribble notes, his expression growing more serious with each accusation. Linda continued her performance, describing how Ethan seemed confused and tired during weekend visits, how he talked about different men coming to the house, and how he'd mentioned that Mommy was never home at bedtime. "The child desperately needs stability, Your Honor. He needs a proper family structure with consistent schedules and moral guidance. My son Marcus is ready to provide that along with his wonderful fiancée Jessica, who's eager to be a mother figure." When Marcus's lawyer, David Rodriguez, stood up for cross-examination, I felt my stomach drop. This man had a reputation for being ruthless, and he immediately went for the throat. Mrs. Williams, in your professional opinion as a retired school administrator, would you consider a woman who works night shifts and frequently has male visitors to be providing adequate supervision for an 8-year-old child? My own lawyer objected, but the damage was already done. Rodriguez had planted the seed that I was somehow promiscuous and neglectful. He continued his attack, asking leading questions about Ethan's emotional state and whether Linda had observed concerning behaviors that might indicate trauma or neglect. Then Marcus took the stand, and I watched my ex-husband lie with the same smooth confidence he'd always possessed. He painted himself as the concerned father who'd tried to work things out but had been pushed away by my hostility and unwillingness to co-parent. Your Honor, I've been trying to be more involved in Ethan's life, but Maya makes it incredibly difficult, Marcus testified, his voice filled with fake sincerity. She schedules activities during my visitation time. She's introduced him to this new boyfriend without consulting me, and frankly, I'm concerned about the example she's setting. Rodriguez guided Marcus through a carefully crafted narrative that made my night shifts sound like abandonment, and my relationship with Jake sound like a revolving door of men. They twisted every detail of our life into evidence of my unfitness as a mother. The child needs consistency, Your Honor. He needs to wake up every morning knowing his parent will be there. He needs traditional family values and proper supervision. Maya's lifestyle simply cannot provide that. The worst part was watching the judge's reaction. He kept glancing at Ethan, who was sitting quietly in the front row, clutching his tablet. I could see the concern in the judge's eyes as he processed their arguments about emotional stability and appropriate role models. Rodriguez then called their child's psychologist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had never actually met Ethan but was willing to testify about the potential psychological impact of my work schedule. She used clinical terms to describe how night shift work could disrupt attachment patterns and how inconsistent caregiver presence might lead to behavioral issues and emotional instability. Children need predictable routines and constant parental supervision, Dr. Mitchell explained. When a primary caregiver is absent during traditional family hours and relies heavily on substitute care, it can create anxiety and confusion in young children. I felt my heart sinking with every word. They were making my dedication to providing for Ethan sound like child abuse. My choice to work nights so I could afford to give him everything he needed was being twisted into evidence that I was a neglectful mother. When my lawyer finally got a chance to cross-examine, she tried to point out that I spent every afternoon with Ethan, that Mrs. Peterson was a trusted neighbor, and that my nursing career was both stable and well-paying. But Rodriguez had already created a narrative that was hard to shake. The judge asked pointed questions about my ability to provide consistent supervision and whether I'd considered more traditional work arrangements that would allow for better work-life balance. Each question felt like another nail in the coffin of my chances to keep my son. As the morning dragged on, I realized with growing horror that I was losing. Despite everything I'd sacrificed and every way I'd shown my love for Ethan, they were successfully painting me as an unfit mother. Just as my lawyer finished her weak closing argument and I felt the last shreds of hope slipping away, something extraordinary happened. Ethan suddenly stood up from his seat in the front row, his small tablet clutched in both hands. "Excuse me, Judge, but they're not telling the truth about my mom." The entire courtroom froze. The judge looked up from his notes with surprise, while Marcus and Linda exchanged panicked glances. David Rodriguez immediately shot to his feet, ready to object, but the judge held up his hand for silence. "Young man, this is a very serious courtroom proceeding," the judge said gently but firmly. "You need to sit down and let the adults handle this." But Ethan didn't budge. At 8 years old, my son stood there with a determination I'd never seen before, his chin raised and his voice steady despite his small stature. "Please, Judge, I know I'm just a kid, but I heard them talking about me and my mom when they thought I wasn't listening. I recorded it because I knew nobody would believe me." My heart stopped. I had no idea what Ethan was talking about, but the confidence in his voice told me he'd been planning this moment. David Rodriguez was frantically objecting, claiming it was inappropriate to involve a child in legal proceedings, but the judge seemed genuinely curious about what my 8-year-old had to say. "What exactly did you record, son?" the judge asked, leaning forward with interest. Ethan held up his tablet, the same device I'd bought him for educational games and our nightly video calls during my work breaks. "Last weekend, when I was staying at Dad's house, I heard him and Grandma Linda talking about getting rid of me and hurting my mom. I knew it was important, so I used my tablet to record them." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus had gone completely pale, while Linda was shaking her head vigorously, trying to signal something to her son. My own lawyer looked as shocked as I felt, but she quickly recovered and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, if the child has evidence relevant to this custody determination, I believe the court should hear it." Rodriguez was practically shouting his objections now. "This is highly irregular, Your Honor. Children cannot be witnesses in their own custody cases. Any recording would be inadmissible and potentially traumatic for the child to discuss." But the judge was studying Ethan carefully, and I could see something had shifted in his demeanor. My son wasn't acting like a coached child or someone who'd been manipulated into saying certain things. He was acting like a kid who'd discovered something terrible and wanted to make it right. "Son, do you understand what a recording is? And do you understand that what you recorded might be very important to this case?" the judge asked. Ethan nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. My mom always tells me to tell the truth, and I think you need to know the truth about what they really want to do with me. They were talking about sending me away and making my mom cry, and that's not fair because my mom is the best mom in the whole world." The judge glanced at both legal teams, then back at Ethan. "I'm going to allow this evidence to be presented with the understanding that we're doing what's in the best interest of the child. Young man, can you play what you recorded?" Ethan's face lit up with relief and determination. He walked closer to the judge's bench, his small fingers working confidently on his tablet screen. "I know how to use this really good because my mom taught me. She calls me on it every night during her work breaks to say goodnight, and sometimes I play games while I'm waiting for her call." Marcus was whispering urgently to his lawyer, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Linda had gone from confident and composed to visibly nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Even their lawyer looked like he was realizing his carefully constructed case was about to crumble. "I put it on the table next to where they were sitting," Ethan explained to the judge, his voice getting stronger with each word. "They didn't know I was listening because I was supposed to be watching TV in the other room, but I heard them saying mean things about my mom, and I knew I had to save it so someone would believe me." The judge nodded approvingly. "That was very smart thinking, Ethan. Now I want you to play what you recorded, and then you can sit back down with your mom." Ethan beamed at being called smart by the judge, then looked directly at me with an expression that seemed to say, "Don't worry, Mom. I've got this." He pressed play on his tablet, and the courtroom fell completely silent as we all waited to hear what my 8-year-old son had discovered. The sound quality from Ethan's tablet was surprisingly clear as Marcus's voice filled the silent courtroom. I recognized the setting immediately from the background noise. It was his apartment living room where Ethan always stayed during weekend visits. "Look, Mom, I don't actually want Ethan living with us full time." Marcus's voice came through the small speakers, casual and matter-of-fact. "Jessica just wants people to think we're this perfect family unit for her social media and her friends at work. The whole custody thing is really about making Maya suffer and cutting down my child support payments." I felt the blood drain from my face. The judge was leaning forward intently, while David Rodriguez was frantically scribbling notes and whispering to his assistant. Linda Williams looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The recording continued with Linda's voice, just as clear and damning. "Thank goodness, because I certainly can't handle an 8-year-old running around my house every day. My bridge club would have a fit, and I'm far too old to be chasing after a child. We just need to make sure that nurse doesn't have any legal standing to interfere with our plans." Several people in the courtroom gasped audibly. My own lawyer was writing furiously, capturing every word, while I sat there in shock, listening to them casually discuss destroying my life and abandoning my son. Marcus's voice returned, and what he said next made my stomach turn. "Once I get custody established, we'll send him to that boarding school upstate, Millfield Academy. They take kids as young as 8, and it's year-round. Jessica found it online. The kid will be out of our hair. Maya will be heartbroken and powerless to stop it, and we can go on with our lives. Perfect, Linda responded with obvious relief. I was worried you'd actually expect me to help raise him. I raised my children already, and frankly, that boy has too much of his mother's attitude for my taste. A good boarding school will straighten him out and teach him proper respect for authority. The recording picked up Marcus laughing, a sound that made me feel physically sick. The best part is that Ethan's too young to understand what's happening. By the time he figures out that we don't actually want him around, he'll be institutionalized and conditioned to the system. Kids adapt to whatever situation you put them in at that age. Linda's voice became conspiratorial. And Maya will be completely destroyed. She'll spend years fighting the system trying to get him back. But once a child is placed in residential care and the custodial parent claims they can't handle him, it becomes very difficult to reverse. She'll exhaust herself emotionally and financially, which is exactly what she deserves for all the trouble she's caused. The judge's expression had transformed from professional detachment to barely controlled anger. He was staring at Marcus and Linda with a look that could have melted steel, while Marcus had turned an alarming shade of gray. The recording continued relentlessly. Jessica's already picked out how she wants to redecorate his room once he's gone, Marcus said. She wants to turn it into her yoga studio. She figures we'll have him for holidays and summer breaks for appearances, but most of the time, we'll be free to live like a normal couple without the baggage. Brilliant, Linda replied. That woman thought she could trap my son with a pregnancy and then work her manipulative nursing schedule to make herself look like some kind of martyr. Well, now she'll learn what happens when you cross the Williams family. The final part of the recording was the most devastating. Marcus's voice took on a cruel edge that I remembered from our worst fights during the divorce. Ethan will never know we planned this. We'll tell him his mother abandoned him when things got difficult, that she chose her career and her boyfriends over him. Children believe whatever you tell them consistently enough. By the time he's a teenager, he'll hate her and won't want anything to do with her anyway. And if she tries to contact him at school or cause trouble, we'll have documented evidence that she's unstable and harassing a child in residential care, Linda added with satisfaction. The system will side with us every time. The recording ended with the sound of them clinking glasses together, as if they were celebrating the destruction of my life and the abandonment of my child. The courtroom was dead silent for a long moment. The judge was staring at the tablet, then at Marcus and Linda, his face a mask of professional fury. David Rodriguez looked like he wanted to crawl under his table, while Marcus and Linda sat frozen in their seats, caught in their own words. Ethan walked back to his seat beside me, slipping his small hand into mine. He whispered, "I knew they were lying about you, Mom." I wanted everyone else to know the truth, too. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the stunned courtroom. His voice was steady but filled with barely contained fury as he addressed Marcus and Linda directly. In 30 years on this bench, I have never witnessed such a calculated and malicious attempt to manipulate the family court system. Mr. Williams, Mrs. Williams, your own recorded words have revealed a conspiracy to commit what amounts to child abandonment and parental alienation. Marcus tried to stammer out some excuse about the recording being taken out of context, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. Mr. Williams, your petition for custody is not only denied, but I am ordering an immediate investigation into your fitness as a parent. Your visitation rights are hereby suspended, pending a full review. Mrs. Chen, your son will remain in your custody, and I am issuing a restraining order, preventing any member of the Williams family from contacting either you or Ethan outside of court-supervised visits. I felt my knees go weak with relief. Ethan squeezed my hand tighter, and I could see tears of joy streaming down his face. The nightmare was finally over, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential fraud charges. Attempting to manipulate custody proceedings through false testimony constitutes perjury, and conspiracy to abandon a child may constitute criminal neglect. David Rodriguez was frantically packing his briefcase, clearly wanting to distance himself from his now toxic clients. Linda Williams had gone completely white, while Marcus looked like he might be sick right there in the courtroom. The judge turned his attention to Ethan, his stern expression softening considerably. Young man, what you did today took incredible courage. You protected your mother and yourself by telling the truth, even when it was scary. That shows real character. Ethan beamed with pride, standing a little taller. Thank you, sir. My mom always says the truth is the most important thing, even when it's hard. Your mother raised you well, the judge replied, glancing at me with approval. Mrs. Chen, based on everything I've heard today, including the testimony of your neighbors, your employer, and your son's school, it's clear that you are a devoted and capable mother. Your work schedule is not only reasonable, but admirable, given that you're saving lives while providing for your family. As we left the courthouse that day, I couldn't stop hugging Ethan. My brave, brilliant little boy had saved us both with his quick thinking and courage. Jake was waiting for us in the parking lot, and when Ethan ran to him shouting, "We won! We won!" Jake lifted him up and spun him around like the hero he was. 6 months later, our lives had settled into an even better rhythm than before. The stress of the custody battle was behind us, and I'd been promoted to charge nurse on my shift, which came with a significant raise. Jake had moved in with us, and we were planning our wedding for the following spring. Ethan was thriving in school, proud to tell everyone about how he'd outsmarted the adults who tried to separate our family. The best part was that our story had somehow made its way onto social media, where it went viral as the 8-year-old who saved his mom. Thousands of people shared it, commenting about Ethan's bravery and intelligence, and the video got millions of views. Parents everywhere were praising him as an example of how children can be heroes too. Marcus was facing fraud charges and had lost his job when the recording became public. Linda had to move in with her sister after the legal fees bankrupted her. Justice had been served in the most poetic way possible, by an 8-year-old with a tablet and an unshakable sense of right and wrong. Every night when I called Ethan during my breaks, he'd tell me about his day, and I'd remind him how proud I was of his courage. He'd grown more confident since the trial, knowing that he'd stood up for what was right and won. Our Saturday morning pancake tradition continued, but now Jake joined us, and Ethan would regale us with stories about his friends at school, asking him to teach them how to use their tablets to record things. I had to explain that most kids didn't need to gather evidence against lying adults, but Ethan just grinned and said he was ready if any of his friends ever needed help with the truth. The judge had been right. I'd raised him well. But that day in the courtroom, Ethan had taught me something too. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truths, and sometimes an 8-year-old with determination and a tablet can change everything. If you enjoyed this incredible story of courage and justice, please share this video with others who need to hear it. Comment below about what you thought of Ethan's brave actions, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Your support helps us continue bringing these inspiring tales to families everywhere.